Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson is located here in Treaty 1 territory. That's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are delighted to welcome you all here, both in person and virtually, to all watching on YouTube, to the launch of Max Blankstein, Architect. This is a book by Murray Peterson, published by the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation. This is our final in-person event of the year, and it seems particularly fitting to go out with an evening celebrating one of the great trailblazers in Winnipeg's cultural community, so we couldn't be more delighted to have you all here to participate. I just have a few very quick housekeeping notes before I depart the stage, so thank you in advance for your forbearance. So there'll be a presentation up here from the podium. Following that, there'll be an opportunity for you folks to ask questions. What I'll do at that point is run around with a microphone, and this is by no means a comment on your own ability to project your voice. This is just to ensure that any viewers watching at home can actually hear the questions and prevents us from having to repeat them. If you are one of those viewers watching at home, please feel free to write any questions you might have into the chat in the YouTube stream, and we'll be sure to put them to Murray as time permits. I'll be back at the end of the event with some absolutely stimulating notes about signing procedure. But for now, the only thing I will put in your brain is just that at the close of the event, we'll ask you to remain in your seats for just one moment while we safely transport Murray from this space to the signing table just beside our cash desk, after which point we'll be able to wander over and join him. And I'll have a few more notes on that at the end of the evening. But for now, it's my great pleasure to invite up to this podium Susan Alger, Executive Director of the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation, to introduce the evening.
Thanks very much, John, and thank you everyone for coming out on this snowy, blowy evening, and for those of you who've traveled from far to attend our various Blankstein events. The Winnipeg Architecture Foundation, some of you will be aware, is involved in a great deal of research, writing, trying to showcase Winnipeg's architects and designers and the buildings that they have left on the landscape. Primarily, we concentrate on the modernist era, but we also do investigate earlier designers, and in this case, it's Max Blankstein. We're really pleased to launch this book as our 18th publication, most of which are on sale here at McNally Robinson. The author of Max Blankstein is Murray Peterson. Murray is well known in Winnipeg as a researcher, as a writer, as a presenter. He's been involved in a wide range of projects, educational, as well as a researcher and a writer for the City of Winnipeg Historic Buildings Committee. And so when you see buildings that have been designated and that decision has been made based on good research, Murray's the one who put that research together and wrote it up in a very coherent, intelligent manner. So very experienced in dealing with Winnipeg history and knowledgeable about it. He's going to talk about Max Blankstein tonight, who I think some of you will be aware of his work, but Murray's going to show the breadth of his work and a bit about his very interesting history. So I hope that you enjoy the presentation and feel encouraged to purchase a book so that you can read in more detail about this great architect. Murray?
Thank you very much. I'm not sure that I wouldn't want John to be doing this presentation. Wow, that is a smooth voice. Oh, nice notes all over my, some of this might nod off. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Murray Peterson, and I'm a Winnipeg historian. Tonight I have the pleasure and the honor of speaking about one of Winnipeg's outstanding architects, Max Blankstein. I said this afternoon. After researching somebody for over 2 years, I feel that I'm allowed to call him by his first name, Max. So it'll be Max today. So Max designed hundreds of buildings in Winnipeg and across the prairies over his career. I would like to acknowledge the generous help of the Blankstein family who made this project possible. In particular, I'd like to thank Murray Blankstein, and Murray, if you wouldn't mind standing up just to show your beautiful face. Murray was invaluable. Yes, please. Murray was invaluable with his information, his images, his consistent and often editing and his support. This book was not possible without the Blankstein family and Murray. Thank you very much. I also wish to thank the design crew. Oh, I'm in charge of this now. Okay. I also like to thank the design crew at the Winnipeg Architects Foundation. I can assure you that when the final draft was handed in, it looked nothing like the book in your laps, nothing. They did a fabulous job taking all of the bits and pieces that I pulled together and making it into a thing of beauty. And of course, I can't thank Susan enough for giving me this opportunity. So Max's story begins in Odessa, Ukraine in 1874 and includes upheaval and new beginnings, and ends with a successful, most would call a trailblazing career and a remarkable legacy that continues today. The port of Odessa on the Black Sea grew in size and stature in the 19th century. Its Jewish population increasingly participated in the region's economic, political, and cultural life. Max's father, Meir, was a contractor and stonemason in Odessa, who, to protect his loved ones, changed the family name to Blankstein and their nationality to Austrian. This was not, however, enough to shield them from the rising anti-Semitism of the Russian Empire of the late 19th and early 20th century. Max was born in 1874, 3 years after Russian mobs killed and looted Jewish citizens in Odessa and elsewhere. Russian law discriminated against Ukrainian Jews and often excluded them from educational opportunities. Despite this, Max did receive training as a contractor and an architect. These are 3 known examples of Max's designs in Odessa that still stand. 2 of these show the architectural detailing that Max would apply to his projects in Western Canada. In 1902, Max married Esther Golden, and the couple had 2 children, Verna in 1902 and Isaac Wolf in 1904. With war breaking out between Japan and Russia, and faced with a new wave of conscriptions, Max and his brother-in-law Gershon G. Golden traveled to Hamburg and then boarded separate ships to North America. They reunited in Winnipeg, and Blankstein worked on the railroad, and by year's end, he had organized the arrangements to bring his family over. So what did they find when they arrived in Winnipeg? Well, they found a city on the cusp of the greatest decade of growth in its history. A city bursting at its seams as immigrants from Eastern Canada and all around the world found work in its growing economy. Winnipeg's population grew over 200% between 1901 and 1911. And during that same period, the value of building permits increased over 1,000% to nearly $15 million. Of course, the economic successes of the established Winnipeggers was not always enjoyed by the immigrant communities. Often, the growing immigrant population settled in language-based groups, and they often settled near their place of employment. A high percentage found work in the Canadian Pacific Railway yards, which physically divided the North End, where they lived, from the rest of Winnipeg. But these immigrant communities also flourished. Along Main Street, Selkirk Avenue, and other thoroughfares, they started businesses and opened professional offices. They offered items and services from the old country, and often in several languages. Max's wife, Esther, their 2 children, her mother and her sister arrived in Winnipeg in 1905. Sadly, Max's wife died in 1906, and he married his sister-in-law, Lena Golden, in 1907. The couple had 5 more children: Cecil Nathan in 1908, Eva Rebecca in 1909, Evelyn in 1913, Frederick Inge in 1921, and Morley in 1924. It's quite a family. 4 of the children distinguished themselves in design and architecture and construction. Wolf was a theater owner and contractor. Cecil was a founding member of Green Blankstein Russell, founded in 1931 and growing into one of Winnipeg's most influential firms, now known as Stantec. Evelyn, the second female to graduate with a Bachelor of Architecture degree from the U of M, enjoyed a long and respected career. And Morley, a founding member of the architectural firm Coop and Blankstein in 1956, which would ultimately be known as Number 10 Architectural Group, with many outstanding designs across the country. In fact, several of Max's grandchildren also followed in his footsteps and had careers in planning and design. So what I've found in my research about Max's professional career is a very talented designer who was as comfortable designing a plain house, a small garage, or a sturdy mixed-use block as he was a wondrous theater. He was versatile, he was well-known, and he was busy. Blankstein's name first appeared on the City of Winnipeg building permits in 1907. And in 1910, he registered with the Manitoba Association of Architects, the first licensed Jewish architect in Canada. He would register with the Saskatchewan organization in 1929. That began over 2 decades of work throughout the city. Almost all of the work was found in the North End. His work was found elsewhere in Manitoba and in Saskatchewan. Much of Blankstein's work was built on the regular clientele within the Winnipeg strong Jewish community. Oftentimes, he would design numerous structures for the same company or family. Blankstein designed the Zimmerman block in 1913 for jeweler William Zimmerman. The main floor bay display windows are unique, slightly rounded and topped by a roof of bronze scales. They are unchanged since construction. But it's the stone cladding of the upper floors where we can see his flair for ornamentation. The 2 bays feature a wealth of detail, from pilasters with ionic capitals to oversized brackets, carved garlands, keystones, grotesques, lions' heads and women's heads set above the windows. The oversized cornice finishes this facade. It's busy. This facade would have been ordered by Blankstein from a catalog, shipped to Winnipeg, installed by tying it to the wall behind. As you can see by these images, he could ornament with the best of them, or he could not. Much of his work was firmly based in classical architecture, symmetry, varying materials, and detailing. Many of his designs utilized diamonds or other geometric shaped panels. Cladding could be brick or stone, but also pigmented stucco. Pictured here are a public garage at 167 Logan Avenue, built in 1916, one of my favorites, actually. It's a real cutie. I'll invite you to drive by. There's very few of the buildings that you're going to see today that aren't still standing. So I invite you to drive by and have a look, park legally, and have a look because they're spectacular. So that's the public garage. The Continental block is located at 794 Main Street. It's built as a mixed-use commercial apartment block, and it was built in 1911. The Talmud Torah Hebrew School at 220 Andrew Street was built in 1922. The European block, also known as OB's Steam Bath and Apartments, was built in 1914, and the H&M Weidman and Company warehouse at 230 Jarvis was built in 1910, and that's one of our demolished buildings, so don't drive by that one. Selkirk Avenue, as we know, was the heart of Winnipeg's North End, and it's an actual library of Max Blankstein's designed buildings. Some of his designs are modest, but there's also theaters, office buildings, and commercial blocks. Pictured here are the Budnick block, 594 to 602 Selkirk, built in 1910. Yeah, I got so excited. I did. Thank you very much. Don't be shy. Just tell me. You handed me an errata, so don't be shy about mistakes. The Budnick block, 594 602 Selkirk, built in 1910, and a large addition added in 1929. The Merchants Hotel, originally the Steinman block at 541 Selkirk Avenue, built for Lithuanian hardware merchant Robert Steinman in 1913 and converted into the Merchants Hotel in 1933. This one has been recently reimagined into community space, and it's a proud partner in the area. The Palace Theatre at 501 Selkirk Avenue was built in 1912, and the Hebrew Association Hall and Theatre at 239 Selkirk Avenue, which has a strange history, was built in 1890 as a Presbyterian church, but converted into a theatre and a meeting hall in 1909 under the design of Max Blankstein by the Hebrew Sick Benefits Association. Then it was given the Art Deco facade in the 1930s and operated for many years as the Queen's Theatre. Several of Max's designs had to solve unique problems. This is the Film Exchange building on Hargrave Street, built in 1922. It was designed to store and distribute reels of highly flammable motion picture film. The building included an interior automobile ramp to facilitate the moving of this material. In 1937, much of the building was converted into offices. Max's son Morley and his partner Isidore Koop opened their first architectural office in this building in 1956. Winnipeggers loved apartment blocks. Between 1906 and 1915, no city of any size in Canada built more. The demand was high because of a number of factors. Our climate, developers realizing that there was a steady return on their investment, and traveling salesmen. Blankstein, like his contemporary, designed a number of these blocks, from plain, functional buildings full of small, comfortable suites to luxury blocks with all the amenities. This is the Reuben block, also known as the Morley Apartments at 270 Morley Street at Osborne. It was built as a mixed-use block with commercial space on the main floor and apartments above. It was completed in 1914. Again, we can see classical detailing at the roof line and in the ornate stone surrounds of the entrances. This is the North Panama block, 229 McRae Avenue. It was built in 1914. The design is simple, attractive, and fits well in the neighborhood. After Max's death and the sale of their home at 131 McRae, his widow and children moved into a suite in this block. So he must have liked it too. This is the Jesse block, a large apartment block designed by Blankstein in 1914 and actually one of his largest contracts. Again, we see that he wasn't afraid of making a statement with his design and provided a number of elements to animate the facades and to provide light and air to the suites. One of his more important contracts was the design of the Winnipeg Hebrew Free School on Charles Street, constructed in 1913. Classically detailed, the institution had grown from 1907 to need a larger, more modern facility. It occupied this building until 1952. As you can see from these pictures, Max was also skilled in designing unique single-family homes. He used colors, materials, and ornamental detailing to give them their own character. 256 Garfield South, built in 1927 for Furrier Morris Kim. The Blankstein home at 131 McRae was built in 1922. Its neighbor, 133 McRae, was the Daniel Smith House, built in 1931. And 238 Kingsway is the William McMartin House, built in 1912. Like all in his profession, World War I and then the up and down economies of the late 10s and early 20s would have a serious effect on Max's business. And while he continued to design all types of buildings throughout his career, it was theaters where Blankstein excelled, bringing a uniqueness to his basic designs. We must remember that theater buildings were once as important a part of the experience of moviegoing as the actual movie itself. Chaser lights, gaudily outlining facades of vaudeville theaters gave way to movie theaters with opulent and imaginative exteriors and interiors. Blankstein proved that he could design a comfortable, small town movie house or a lavish building with an auditorium boasting Spanish villas underneath the star-filled sky. And Max established ties with Jack Miles, one of Western Canada's premier theater owners, an owner who owned 18 theaters in Winnipeg at its peak. Here we see two Roxy theaters. The left is at 385 Henderson Highway. It was built in 1929 for the Allied theater chain of Jacob Miles and Nathan Rothstein. It was converted into the Roxy Bowling Lane in 1960 and is now slated for demolition. The right Roxy is on 20th Street West in Saskatoon. It was completed in 1930 at a cost of $73,000, and you can see a bit of the Spanish villa behind the theater goers. The Rose Theatre, 801 Sargent Avenue, was opened in 1926 and is now partially used as a daycare center. The Palace Theatre at 501 Selkirk Avenue, was built in 1912, but expanded and given a new Blankstein front facade in 1927-28. And you can see that his designs have a certain rhythm to them, and he made sure that they were all a little bit different. On the left is the Lido Theatre in the Paw, Manitoba, opened in 1929 and still operating. On the right is the demolished Broadway Theatre, opened in Regina in 1929. And I use these two as an example of what is an excellent example of Max's ability to provide his clients with visually unique buildings. You have the subdued classicalism of the Lido and the exuberant Spanish revival of the Broadway. Off the same desk, so very talented. The Roxy Theatre in Yorkton, Saskatchewan was opened in 1928 and demolished in 1964 for a bank parking lot. That's where I take a break because you're all shaking your heads. Undoubtedly, his masterpiece was the Uptown Theatre on Academy Road, opened shortly after his death in 1931. From the striking exterior with twin towers, red tile roofs, and unique windows, to the exotic interior designed as a Moorish village set under a dark blue sky, twinkling with stars. The building's original interior was removed when it was converted into a bowling alley, and the exterior began to show signs of aging by the 2010s. Its recent conversion into residential space has meant the careful restoration of the front facade, and a portion of the original entrance ceiling that was discovered once construction had begun has been expertly restored. It truly has been returned to its original beauty. Lots of pictures. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a brief look at the life and career of Max Blankstein. It is a testament to the abilities of another of Winnipeg's immigrant citizens, and the Blankstein legacy is undeniable. Thank you. Yeah, really? You sure? I like the last slide better. I'll just look this way. Okay, so are there any questions that we have? Take a sip of water.
I was just wondering about the Academy building. Why do you think that one was saved and restored as opposed to others that haven't been so, that the saving of them hasn't been that successful?
That's a terrific question. I think the level of architecture on the front facade, it's so eye-catching. Also, I think because it's in a sort of a residential neighborhood, so the neighborhood learned to love it, since it was built. Their kids and their kids went to it and bowled there. I took my kids to bowl there. I wasn't even in the neighborhood, but I think just the level of skill in the design and the beauty of it. I think sometimes developers will take a chance on something when it's that spectacular. So, and we're glad they did, and did a remarkable job. The developer of the building, of restoring the building. Very carefully done, no shorts, nothing. We didn't take any shortcuts anywhere. It's a great job. Very proud of it. And we needed a cover for the book. So,
did many of the theaters have a balcony section? I kind of remember in the Palace there was a balcony where all the rowdy kids would sit.
And why do you remember that? Yes, most of them would have had a balcony. Now, what happened was, you know, they were built in the 30s or the 20s or the 10s, and they were very popular. They were very well used, and then they weren't. You know, you got the eight cinema, you know, the 8 theater cinemas and all that. So a lot of the theaters just kind of stopped and were basically boarded up and not reused. So for many of them, they suffered from neglect or from, you know, just vacancy. So oftentimes, I know I've been in several of the Blankstein theaters, and they've gutted it. So the balcony is not there anymore. Thank you. Great question.
Could you tell us a little bit about how he ran his office? I would imagine it went from being small to much larger, and he produced so many buildings. He must have had a staff to help him with that.
Well, that's so. I presented today at Millennium and got almost the exact same question, and then I listened to Murray Blankstein, and he told me it actually didn't. He worked from his home on McRae Avenue, and it was him. You know, I've seen a lot of the plans. There doesn't appear to be any evidence that he had anybody working with him, like a draftsman or another designer. So it was all Max, all from the table, and the kids helped. Apparently, we didn't quite get from Murray what that meant, help, because I know if my kids helped me, it's not anything like that. But yeah, it was Murray all by himself, and you have to remember that you know, the slides that we saw today are kind of his biggest and best, but he designed hundreds of little garages and little additions and little houses and bungalows all over. So he was very busy, and in the 20s he wasn't like everybody else in Winnipeg. Terrific question, thank you.
I'm just going to comment about the Uptown Theatre. It was saved because in the early 1980s, Bill Neville, who was the councillor for River Heights, really made sure that a lot of the landmark buildings were protected. So there's the fire hall on Wilton, and the Uptown were 2 buildings that he really went out on a limb as a city councillor to try to protect them. And one of the reasons it was saved was because there was an addition added to the theater that provided additional income through offices and retail. And but that goes back to the 80s. So, you know, sometimes it's the politicians that you elect who work behind the scenes to try to protect.
Can you imagine? Politicians help. Thank you, Mr. Vigilescu.
That was meant.
Yeah. I believe our one and only Lithuanian in the crowd tonight.
A high school friend of mine grew up in 131 McRae, so I'm wondering, can you offer any more details? Like what floor or what room did he work in there?
Could you run that mic over to Murray Blankstein, because he's going to answer that for sure.
My understanding from my father is that he worked from the living room. The living room was his office, and with the help of his kids.
He said that again with a straight face. Good for you.
You said the Roxy is slated for demolition. Can it be saved?
Anything can be saved. It is quite far gone in terms of its originality. The last site visit I did was last summer, and there's nothing on the interior. We couldn't find a single bit of interior left, and the exterior has been pretty severely altered. If you're going to pick a couple of Blankstein theaters to save, I personally wouldn't say that one. You know, there are other ones that are, I think, a little bit more original that would have a better chance. So it can be saved. I just don't know whether it would be worth it being saved. Ooh.
I was wondering if you've been out on the interior of the one on Selkirk Avenue and whether you would think that that one would be safe.
I haven't been in that one in years, but again, if memory serves, and my children will attest to the fact, and my wife will attest to the fact that it does not serve. I think that one's all gone too. I believe that was the one that became a big four. It was a sales. Yeah, that one. Yeah, just nod your head. Yeah. So I think that was all removed. I'm pretty sure it's gutted, and that was kind of like when they all stopped and they were all boarded. They deteriorated really quickly, right? With no heat, and a lot of times water would get in. So a lot of times it had to be demolished if it was going to be reused. So all of it came. And I mean, most of those, most of the Roxy's and those ones wouldn't have had the villas on the sides. I mean, that was for special theaters. So it would have been, it would have been beautiful because that's what Max did, but probably not as ornate as that. Yes.
Not in Winnipeg, but just to mention that the Lido Theatre in DePaul, which has been continuously a theater, as Murray said, still has all of its interior intact. And it is one of the atmospheric theaters. And so it took this more detail. You can see some photos online. It's been in the same family for that entire time. And I know that they have had GoFundMe, et cetera, looking to try to keep the theater going. So, you could contribute or go to the paw and go to a movie. It isn't obviously in a large center, but it's probably one of the most intact of all of Max's theaters.
Here we go. That hit a nerve.
So I have an interesting story. I'm an architect. My family moved to Winnipeg in 1955, and I grew up in the European bloc. My grandfather was Harry Oberman, or Obi.
Wow, see?
So I know what it's like to grow up living above a steam bath.
That's why your skin's so nice.
Yeah. So I never really found out why my grandparents bought that building and why they decided they could run a steam bath. But it was a very interesting building. And my entire childhood was sort of focused on that. And I'd be very interested. We've spoken about other things in the past. I don't know if you remember, it was St. Luke's Church. But I'd be very interested in seeing if there are floor plans of the European bloc available. Reason being is we grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment, my mother and 4 kids, and my grandparents, the owners of the building, they lived in an apartment just one away from us. But it's a really cool building, really interesting. I don't know why they painted it red, the barn, it's horrible. But anyways, just some interest.
Yeah, we'll talk after they whisk me away, because they're going to. We'll talk. I'm pretty sure we do have plans for it. Susan says we do, so we do.
And a question about the Rubin block at Morley and South Osborne. Anything happening with trying to avoid that demolishment by neglect?
I said at lunch today that as soon as I put that slide in, I knew I was going to get this question, which is great. So there's nothing to report. It did have several fires in it over the years, so there is structural issues with the building, but nothing to report. The neighborhood made its voice very clear, and I think we know that. So nothing to report, but nothing. Haven't seen any demolition permits, so I think it's in a holding pattern for now. Thank you. It's a great question. Thank you for asking, because I knew someone was good.
Murray, with an architect with such a legacy in Winnipeg, it surprises me that according to your list in the back of the book, there are only 2 buildings outside of Winnipeg that he designed. Is it because we just don't know about others, or is it for some reason he decided to focus on Winnipeg?
Oh no, Gordon, my research is perfect. So. I agree. That was one of the first things when I started to try and pull together a list of all of his buildings, all of his designs, you know, from the City of Winnipeg building permits, and realized, wow, he was a busy man. The next thing I did was start to look Brandon, obviously, and Portage maybe, but really Brandon, I thought, well, there's got to be something there, and we really couldn't find anything. That doesn't mean that there weren't. I would be really surprised if he didn't throw some designs out there, but we couldn't find any. You know, hoping someone's going to stand up tonight and say, I know there's a Blankstein. So yeah, it's maybe it was just that he was so busy in the city, he didn't have time to look up, right, with his kids helping him at the dining room or the living room table. Because he, you know, like I said before, he designed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little buildings. So, you know, that takes time, even if it's just a little, you know, a little 8x12 shed. He would have thrown a diamond on it somewhere, made it look presentable. So all that takes time. So maybe he just figured he'd stay within the perimeter.
Are any of his designs marked in any way so the public can see that that's a particular design of his?
I don't think they are. That happens very rarely. I know the Marlborough Hotel has the architect's name on that one. I'm not sure. They didn't. That's a great question, but I don't think the architects in Winnipeg usually did that. It wasn't a thing. So not even really not as many date stones as you would think either. So they just kept their heads down because it was. I mean, we were the center of the world, and you know, before World War I, it was so busy. They just had to keep churning them out.
And were there any further questions at all? Well, if there are no further questions, I'll turn things over to Murray. If you had any closing comments before I return with some procedural.
I can't wait to hear that. I just want to thank you all for coming out tonight. It's lovely to see lots of friends and colleagues in the rows here. This has been a really wonderful project. You know, I knew who Max was, but I really didn't know who he was, and so it's always interesting to start delving into the history of an architect. They're interesting chaps, and then to get the support of the Blankstein family was so wonderful. I got, you know, the pictures in the book are spectacular. You know, you just don't get that with, you know, there were more famous architects, but you know, their bios would be kind of dull and boring because they don't have all of this wonderful story and these wonderful buildings. You know, coming from Southern Ontario and coming out here on the train and you know, working for a couple of years and going back isn't nearly as exciting as coming from Odessa. So it was a wonderful job, and I'm honored to have done it. Thank you, Blankstein family. Thanks to Susan and the crew at WAF. Thank you very much.
All right, so we will move along to the signing portion of the evening. Thank you very much. Before we do, I would just like to apologize for my shameful pronunciation slip up with the surname earlier on. So thank you all for your indulgence on that point. We were so delighted to be able to work with the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation again to host this book launch. It's been a while since we've had the opportunity to launch one of their beautiful books here in the store. So we're particularly grateful to have spent this evening with you all. When it comes to the signing, we will shift Murray over to the signing table in just a moment, at which point you'll be able to wander over and join him there. We have copies of the book at the signing table itself. We also have copies of the book at our cash desk. Feel free to get a copy of the book signed before you pay for it. Please do pay for the book at some point tonight. Otherwise, that's essentially it for me. We're just so grateful that you could come here, spend the time, and are so thankful for all your reminiscences, your questions, and all the information that you've also provided this evening. But I'd like to invite all you to join me in acknowledging one final time the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation, the legacy of Max Blankstein, and of course, author Murray Peterson. Thank you all so much.